Okay, this is a tutorial that's going to help you answer a question that asks you to explain the need for traffic management in a developed world city and evaluate and comment on the effectiveness of the solutions. So the kind of question that we're looking at is this one here, where we've got a resource. In this case, it happens to be Mumbai, which is the case study that you will have looked at. And the question asks for a developing world city, so pay attention, developing. So you must talk about developing world city you've studied, discuss the management strategies used to reduce traffic issues. And then here's an evaluate type of question: to what extent have these techniques been effective? Now, to answer this question, you're going to have to consider three things. What is the traffic problem? And we'll quickly talk about that. What are the solutions? And then evaluate the solutions. So let's first of all consider what is the traffic problem. So there's a few. First of all, Mumbai doesn't have a proper developed public transport system, and therefore most people have been relying on using either their own feet or scooters or driving in cars because of the poor quality of public transport. Second problem is many of the roads in Mumbai developed at a time before the motor car was really common, and therefore then they're quite narrow and there's very dangerous junctions. Third problem is that many of the cars are not fit for purpose, and therefore there's frequent breakdowns, which creates traffic congestion. Fourth problem is during the wet season, during the monsoon, many of the roads aren't properly built and start to collapse or give way, and potholes appear, which creates more congestion. Fifth problem, there's very high levels of pollution because of the amount of cars starting and stopping because of the traffic, which creates huge health risks. Sixth problem, many drivers in Mumbai aren't properly qualified. There's huge amounts of accidents with people being either injured or dying, which puts a burden on families and the health system as well. So that's six particular problems. There are some others that you need to sort of potentially use, but I would pause the video now, quickly note down as many problems as you can think about and how they affect either people or how they affect the city. So you could, for example, say the city's affected because traffic doesn't move, it costs the city billions in lost earnings, which would be another point you could make. And that will help you deal with any question where you're being asked to discuss the problem. Now, more than likely, you're going to be asked to explain the solutions to the problems and evaluate them. So if we have a little look at this, let's have a look at the first solution. It's the building of what's known as the Mumbai Metro, okay? And it's an underground system which goes from the north of the island, traveling right down to the CBD at the bottom of the island. It's largely a single line at the moment. The reason it's not more extensive is because of the sheer cost of building an underground. But the idea is that the underground will take people off the roads and allow people to move down through the island very quickly, which currently takes a long time. On the positive side, if you were to evaluate it, it should help reduce the amount of vehicle traffic above ground. On the negative, the cost is extremely high for a very poor city. It's very slow. It's been subject to delays. On another negative side is that a lot of the communities that live above the line, where stations are being built, are often slum communities, and those communities then get bulldozed or the land gets reclaimed for the building of the transport system, and those people then get pushed elsewhere with very little say, often because obviously they don't legally own the land, so they're negatively impacted. Right, let's move on to a second solution, which is the intelligent traffic management system. So across Mumbai, they built lots of these cameras that are connected to central computers, which monitor all of the main road routes. And the idea behind this intelligent traffic system is that it allows traffic lights to be changed at the press of a button from a remote operator to allow a more efficient movement of traffic, and therefore reducing the amount of time people are spending at traffic lights. On the positive side, it's quite a cheap solution. It's not anywhere near as expensive as building public transport on new roads, and therefore it allows to optimize the flow of vehicles. On a negative, it doesn't actually do anything to reduce the number of cars driving on the roads. It's just trying to make them more efficient. And because the system is so inefficient, it would be argued it's arguable whether it's having any impact on the major junctions in the city. Okay, third solution is the Mumbai Monorail. So the idea here is to build a railway line above the ground to avoid the problems of building a rail system on the surface, which would mean having to demolish lots of roads or buildings. It doesn't interfere with traffic on the surface. It's also much cheaper than building an underground. It's much cheaper to build above ground than it is to build below ground. The problem with the monorail is at the moment they've only got one line, and it goes from the wealthy districts of Mumbai to the city centre, and therefore it's only really benefiting the wealthier people. It's quite expensive to ride on the monorail, and therefore it's only likely that wealthier people are going to be using it to commute. There's not really enough stations, and the stations are only in wealthy areas. So people living in the poorer communities over which it passes often can't actually access the monorail. It was very expensive, which is also why they only built one, and they are just starting to build a second one. And just like the Mumbai Metro, they had to demolish a lot of communities that they passed through when they built the monorail. Okay, another solution is the Skywalks that we can see here. Now the Skywalks, the solution here is to try to get people not walking across traffic, but being able to navigate the urban system by just using these elevated walkways that we can see. Now, why is that a good solution? Well, at the moment, one of the biggest problems with traffic is lights need to be put in at certain places for large numbers of people to be able to cross the roads. And also because often there aren't lights in certain places, what a lot of people were doing is just trying to duck through traffic like we can see this guy here doing, which can then lead to lots of potential accidents, especially from scooters that often don't see people cutting between vehicles. So what the Skywalk system network of elevated pathways does is it's much safer for people. They don't need to cut across traffic, and it also allows traffic to therefore flow much easier. So here we can see people walking freely and easily in a much safer environment on one of the Skywalks. And finally, this is a traffic solution of sorts. The idea here is building the new motorways to outlying cities. This one is the Delhi-Mumbai Expressway, but they've built many of these large expressways to other cities leading away from Mumbai. The idea is that by opening up easy transport between Mumbai and surrounding cities, it encourages, or the idea is to stop people moving towards the overcrowded Mumbai and encourage people to move to maybe some of these satellite cities while still having good access to Mumbai itself. The idea is also it allows an easy flow of vehicles between the major cities of India. The downside of this is traffic is already starting to increase on these motorways, and rather than encourage people to move away, it's actually becoming a force for driving people towards the major cities, opening up increased access so people can easily get into the city. It's also encouraging more cars, so it's not really a public transport solution, and therefore that's not helping deal with the problems of air pollution. If you look in your class notes, there are some other solutions that have been used, which you might want to familiarize yourself with. It depends on how many marks the question is worth, whether it's just to explain the solutions or whether you're being asked to explain and evaluate them. Remember, you should name specific examples. You always get credit for naming examples, like the Delhi-Mumbai Expressway or the Mumbai Monorail, and you'll get probably up to 2 marks for just naming examples. You must make sure you mention Mumbai because the question will be for a named example you've studied.